Hey everyone, welcome to the Renovation Theory podcast. We're your hosts. I'm Pat, and this is Britt.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us. Last week we talked about what our podcast is, why it started, kind of the problems that led to it becoming a thing. We went through a little bit of how we hope it'll be a solution and our core values. And so today we're kind of jumping in, but we're not going to jump in at the deep end.
Yeah, episode 2 here. We want to still walk towards the deep end. We're definitely going to hit some hard issues as we get going here and create some conversation about that. But at the beginning of this podcast, for these first few episodes, we want to establish how this is going to go and establish kind of the right mindset that we want in these discussions between us two and online in our community and as it goes out beyond that as well. So the title for today's episode is called Check Your Bias.
Yeah, so this is just something that's kind of come up recently. About 2 weeks ago, I think it was now, one of my college journalism professors, you had him for a few classes, he passed away, and he was pretty young, but he was somebody that just always, whether in the classroom or in life, really modeled how to have really good conversations, how to ask really good questions. That was something that many people commented on, and when they were talking about him at the funeral, was just his ability to ask questions that really got to the core of things. But I think he also was somebody who, was great at facilitating conversations, not in person, so specifically on Facebook. But part of the reason why he was so good at that was because he could ask questions that would point out people's biases, and he would kind of expose the flaws in their arguments. And I think we don't all have people like that in our lives, and so we just need to be able to take a step back and look at our lives through different lenses or a different viewpoint and see what are the things that we're kind of looking through rose-colored glasses, or we're looking at things not through a full perspective, or we're not seeing things maybe the same way that everybody would be seeing them. And some of these things are maybe because of where we come from culturally, and some of them might be because of external factors. We're going to talk a little bit about like production value and social media and how that can kind of play into our biases as well. So I think, this goes beyond just how we're like conditioned or taught or brought up to see the world too.
That's part of it. Yeah. And that's something that we definitely want to be aware of as we're having this conversation and having these conversations. But a lot of what we want to do is see how external factors are influencing how we're seeing things, because there's often in TV or social media, there are factors, there are algorithms, there are producers that are literally shaping what you see, what you hear, how you hear it. And so it's not across the board, but there are certain situations, and reality TV is probably the big one for me, where they call it reality TV, they call it unscripted, but I think most people know that it's heavily edited and that there are producers there asking questions of these people and digging into and trying to make these people cry or laugh or do whatever. And so there's definitely some manipulation of the story and drama added to this.
Yeah, and I think people know that too, like you alluded to a certain degree, but I've been married to you now for 6 years, and Pat's worked in production, and just hearing some stories about how produced things are, seeing version A and version B, and I work at a video production company as well, and so seeing like how just the right, and sometimes it can be in a good way, like the right way to produce a story can make you feel something totally differently than how you would. And so I don't want to portray that like it's always bad, but we need to be aware of that the people who are the best at these are the people that are working at those reality TV shows and some of these other things, and like those, like, there's dumb movie tropes that are like somebody records somebody saying something and then takes it totally out of context and pieces it together to make some other story, and it,
that's the extreme example.
It can be, but I mean, I think in a lot of times when you think of like The Bachelorette or some of those kind of shows, they're absolutely doing stuff like that. If you don't think they are, then that might be something to just kind of pay attention to a little bit is, how assume that they're probably editing it more than even your filter is allowing you to think.
So it's biased before it even gets to you. And,
Right.
and in a situation like that, it's pretty innocuous.
Sure.
I mean, them editing The Bachelorette or Big Brother is not really going to do anything as far as society as a whole here. But one of the things, going back to Doug, our college professor, he was just one of those guys. He was just a really good journalist.
Mm-hmm.
And really good journalists do as much as they possibly can to recognize their own bias and try not to let that come out in their writing, in their interviews. It's impossible not to let that sway certain things. But Doug was really good at just asking all of the questions, as many questions as he could fit in, and getting to the bottom of a story. And he just had a way of, I remember one class that we had with him. It was just, there were 4 of us, class in his office, but we went on, we were having this little debate on, something related to mass media and how it was related to the church and stuff like that. And so we were talking, and the 4 of us were going back and forth and kind of arguing. And I don't think Doug said anything for half an hour. I mean, just the 4 of us were going at it. We were having a good time. It was good-hearted debate. But I for the life of me can't remember the question that Doug asked, but I just remember him at the end of our debate. He literally looked us all 4 in the eye and asked us one simple question. And we all just kind of sat back and went, huh. I don't know how to respond to that. We spent the last 20 minutes, half an hour talking about this, and now none of us know what to say. Just in a good way. Just we thought we had talked about it to death, and here comes Doug bringing in a completely different viewpoint and blowing
everybody's minds, which is totally Doug's MO. But the other piece, too, is you mentioned really good journalists, but we had a conversation kind of leading up to this podcast around, well, I think that's true of really good and, people that probably stick to kind of the middle of and show both sides of stories and really expose that. But I think something that we have a hard time with right now is understanding that there are a lot of news outlets and journalism professionals that their specific audience that they're going for has a viewpoint. And so no matter how it's written, it probably has some kind of slight slant or not so slight slant. And sometimes I think we know what those extremes are, but sometimes we're not so aware of when things are just slightly one way or slightly the other way, or because we agree with them, we don't really think of them as slanted at all. And I think that's just something that you've talked a little bit about the Google News app and how that's kind of helped you expose that.
I mean, I think we've all been made more aware of this with the Facebook, with the privacy stuff, and with the hackers getting in for the 2016 election, and that whole thing has really exposed some of that, and whether it's right wing or left wing political stories that were literally written for a very, very small specific audience, but somehow got blown up pretty big, and all that. So I think we're more aware of the bias there on social media and kind of the echo chamber that creates, which that will be an episode for in the future, talking about that echo chamber and stuff like that. But I think one of the things that has made me do, and I know it's made me do, is really check my sources. There was a while, and I don't think I'm alone, where I was getting most of my news from Facebook. Yeah. Whether it was articles shared in my news feed or whether it was the top trend stuff on the right-hand side, I was getting the majority of my stuff from Facebook. I don't watch TV news, and I rarely, outside of sports news, went to a news website to check stuff out.
Regularly, especially.
Unless I clicked on a link from Facebook. And so for a while, that was all I got. And then I started to realize that I was getting more and more articles that were saying the same thing from slightly different sources. And so One of the apps that I've really started using lately, and Google just did a really good job with this when they came out with it a few months ago, the Google News app.
Yeah.
Now, I'm an Android fanboy, and that will probably come up in almost every episode of this podcast, but
It's okay. I'm the Apple fanboy, so you've got balance here.
We'll duke that one out. But their Google News app is really good. So it does tailor stories to my interests. Like you plug in what you're interested in, and obviously I'm not blind to the fact that Google knows way too much about me. So they can serve up articles that they know are going to get a reaction or that I'm going to read. But one of the things that I really like about the Google News app is underneath every story, whether it's from Vox or USA Today or CNN, any of those big outlets, you can click on a little icon and it will compare other headlines on the same issue from different news outlets. Some of them bigger, some of them smaller, some of them more local. So you get kind of a local taste of it. But it's been so much better for me, trying to figure out what actually happened and not letting these certain writers or certain news outlets sway my opinion of something, because right in that app, I can look at what this other article says, or it's a lot of times how they phrase it. And that's where the bias comes in journalism. A lot of times, unknowingly, people just write a certain way. But even in our conversations, it's just how we talk. We don't realize we're biased. That's just how we talk. That's how we've been brought up to talk. And so this Google News app does a really good job of letting me compare sources. There's also a website called KnowHere, KNOWHERE. I think it's knowherenews.com. We'll show notes that, whatever the correct URL is. But it's like AI news gathering, basically. And so they look at a bunch of articles that write a story, then they have their machine write an article that's right down the middle of an issue. Then they have their machine write
a little
left leaning and a little right leaning, and they'll also show you other sources on that as well.
So just to kind of dig in a little bit to the Facebook issue, because it's something like I forget how much I know. So I'm in marketing, and I am one of the people that sometimes sets up Facebook ads. And so I kind of know the back end. And so sometimes when you're in that perspective, you kind of forget how much people don't know. And so we just thought it would be really good to talk a little bit deeper about how the Facebook algorithm works, because I think it really helps people understand, or how it has worked historically. It's changing a little bit, but probably not enough to.
And they never really tell us exactly how it works.
Yeah.
And so there's always a little bit of speculation.
Sure. But as far as specifically, let's talk about the 2016 election, because I think that's a really good example of how Facebook can really influence something like an election. So for those of you who don't know, the algorithm is based on a couple of different things. It's based on, ads, I guess, are set up and based on targeting factors. So Facebook.
So that's different from what the algorithm
does. Well, and they're kind of correlated. So the Facebook collects a lot of data on you, and so whether that's based on what you click on, or basically every website now has the ability to put a Facebook tracking pixel, and that's the purpose of it, just so that you understand that, is so that like me as an advertiser can specifically target an ad towards somebody who visited our pricing page or whatever. I think the intention was originally good, but what happens then is pretty much every website you visit is tracking you when you click away from Facebook, which that's a huge amount of power. They're now, being able to track you from the first page that you log on to when you get on the internet through Facebook, and then beyond that too. And that creates what they see as a full picture of you as a digital consumer. And so that plays into the algorithm in the sense of what it continues to show you. So let's say you have a lot of right-leaning friends and they post an article and you click on it. And even if the intro to that article was, I vehemently disagree with everything that this article says, Facebook is still taking that into consideration and saying, oh, this person clicked on that article and they found that to be interesting, and taking that into consideration. So with one click, you're sending yourself down a path of a little deeper down the rabbit hole. And if you're not conscious about being somebody who has people in your feed that have really varying opinions from you, then you can easily get kind of spiraled down into this this very siloed viewpoint of what life is and what your friends and community think about certain political issues. And I think that's what happened in the 2016 election was you had people who all they ever saw was, right-leaning, Hillary's bad, Trump is good, and then you had people that saw really left-leaning and the opposite of that. And so everybody thought, like, this is what everybody thinks. That they thought the whole world around me thinks the same way that I do.
The Facebook algorithm caused that.
Right.
It wasn't anything that Facebook was deliberately doing
Right.
in that situation.
Right.
There are other factors that,
Sure.
implicate them a little bit more. But in that situation, the software algorithm that they built was just doing that.
And like there's some places where that's really good. Like say I click on a tasty video from BuzzFeed, the recipe videos, I'm interested in seeing more of those. I love like getting sucked into those. Or
that's exactly why I don't click on them.
Yeah, right. So there's some cases where like, I'm a bullet journaler, I'm a marketer, and I'm, there's some of those things that I'm happy to go deep into that rabbit hole and be exposed to more and more in that avenue. But there's certain places, and politically is one of the big ones, but I think, with social issues and a lot of these issues that we'll be talking about, where getting locked into that one side can be really dangerous for us.
Yeah. And so it's hard work. Like we like to think of Facebook and social media as something that's made our lives easier because a lot of that information comes to us more than we have to search it out. Mm-hmm. But we have to realize that in order to check our biases, in order to get information that's different from other sources, from other views, we've got to do a little bit of work on that. And so whether that's the Google News app or whether that's just subscribing to the news feeds of several different news organizations to get your news, or just doing the best job that you can to make sure that you have opposing views with your friends on Facebook. Yep. And that goes into our core value of being unoffendable, because sadly, especially politically, a lot of people on Facebook have gone, well, if you agree with Trump, I don't want to be your friend anymore. Right. Or if you agree with Hillary, then I'm not going to be your friend anymore. And that only amplifies that. If I were to suddenly unfriend all of my friends who voted for Trump or Hillary or Gary Johnson or whoever it is, that would only magnify the echo chamber and the bias that I'm seeing. Yeah. And so it may feel good in the moment because it's, just a reactionary emotional thing. And honestly, I don't want to hear anybody who's either way. Like, I don't want to hear that political stuff a lot of the times on Facebook. Right. But unfriending people because they believe something does the opposite of what we're trying to do here and have productive conversations. Right. If you want to be in that echo chamber, fine. Go ahead. Do that. But that's not the point of what we're doing. And we're trying to set things up with this Check Your Bias episode. Just realizing, even if it's just a tool like Facebook or the way CNN writes their news stories or whatever that source is, however you're getting your information, it doesn't have to be just news either. No. Like you mentioned, tasty videos. Right. Something there is shaping that information. Right.
And honestly, in a lot of cases like that, it's sales and your viewership. And that's a big shaping factor as well. Like your time watching stuff, whether it's Netflix or whatever, is really valuable to companies. And so that's just something to keep in mind too, that whether or not you might be voting in the traditional sense, you are voting with your time. And so thinking about how you're spending that too. But the other thing I wanted to talk about too, to make sure we're not just talking about social media, is, think about all the media sources that you're taking into. And I would take that so far as books, but also your TV shows and your music and any of those kind of cultural and media things that you're taking in, because I think those have the ability to kind of break us outside of our boxes too. I just got done reading the book. It's called The Hate U Give, and it's the story of this girl who is in the car with her best friend, and he gets shot by a cop, and she has to go through the experience, and you get a really behind the scenes view of the fears that they go through, and should I communicate with the cops and tell them what I saw, and should I should I be brave and stand out? And it just made me realize, like, yeah, I'm sure I've read other books by authors that are in very different perspectives than me, but I hadn't read anything in that specific perspective before. And I think, as we become wiser adults and realize, like, our viewpoint on the world is such a small sliver, we need to be more open to the idea of taking in other perspectives. And my natural reading tendencies around, like, teenage sci-fi-ish type books, which they're fun and whatever, but that's not really helping me become a better communicator and a better person and check grow that sphere of knowledge around people. And so how often am I listening to albums like Lemonade, Beyonce's Lemonade comes to mind as something that it's a pop cultural thing, but I also know from things I've heard from people that it's really, like, it resonates with people beyond music. And I think that's something that we need to pay attention to, of, like, if that's that important to a certain group of people, then maybe I should listen to it. Or I know, like, Black Twitter comes up a lot. It's a place, like, it's not our place. It's not my place to be writing there, but am I taking that in and exposing myself to things like that where I might be able to see kind of an unfiltered version of other people's opinions?
I think another place that comes up is TV and movies a lot too. Like, the first show that comes to mind is Westworld, because that's literally, it's in a, in an artsy TV show kind of way, but it's dealing with this stuff. Like, spoiler alert if you haven't watched the season 2 of Westworld, but a lot of this kind of algorithm, kind of Facebook shaping your world, gathering info on you type stuff comes to a gigantic head at the end of episode or season 2 of Westworld. And I don't want to give it away because it's a really good show. You should watch it. But culture is being shaped by shows like that. Even if TV doesn't have, like, the mass influence that it once did when we only had 3 or 4 networks and everybody watched the same shows. There are shows like that, or even Game of Thrones a little bit, or movies that are shaping the way we think about culture and are pretty much directly dealing with these issues at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, and to that point, there's a really great episode recently by Seth Godin talking about how entertainment has gotten really long tail. And so rather than having everybody watching 4 channels with the same 4 TV shows, we all can continue in those silos and watch, LGBTQ-based TV shows. You could watch that all day long. You could watch political TV shows all day long. And I think that kind of gets to the point where it's like we're further burrowing ourselves into what we like and what makes us comfortable. So I think that kind of leads me to, like, what I see our challenge being for this week and our question. So I think one of the things that would be really great for people to do would be to think about an area of life that makes you uncomfortable. So it could be another race or ethnicity, it could be the LGBTQ issue, it could be homelessness, it could be you pick something. As you were talking, the show Queer Eye came to mind as something that if you have a hard time understanding people in that area of life and, like, there's an uncomfortableness, what's something that you could go and spend some time watching in even a safe environment that could allow you to just open your mind and your brain up a little bit to that group of people, that area of life, that way of thinking.
Press in a little bit to that. That's one of our core values. And so press into that discomfort a little bit. It might not leave you. You still might be uncomfortable with it, but at least you've pressed in and you hopefully know a little bit more about why that makes you uncomfortable and can explain it, because being uncomfortable with something is not bad.
Right.
That's a natural reaction that we have, and it's a very valid reaction that we have. But if all you do is say, I'm uncomfortable, I'm backing away, then that doesn't help you, doesn't help others when you're having conversations with them. So press into that and try to figure out what makes you uncomfortable about it.
Well, and try to think about what are a few smarter questions that you can ask now that you've exposed yourself. So if you have an uncomfortableness, like what's a a valid question that you can try to ask of somebody else that you feel comfortable and vulnerable with, and trying to understand and bring that area to light a little bit.
So as you're having conversations this week and hopefully thinking about your biases, try to think of just one more intelligent question you can ask after having experienced something new this week. So that's episode 2. Check your biases. If you like what you hear or see, feel free to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast player you like to use. And we will see you next week.